Order the regular scheduled meeting, the Board of Zoning Appeals. Notice to the public of this meeting, the time, the date, the place, and the agenda was published as a legal notice on August the 6th, 2018 in the Aiken Standard. Notice to contiguous property owners and signs were posted on August the 8th, 2016. Notice of this meeting was sent on August 24th, 2016 to the city webpage for posting, to the city clerk for posting on the Finance and Administration Notice Board and the Municipal Building Notice Board at least 24 hours before this meeting. Agenda sheets were mailed or emailed to interested parties. As a reminder, it is unlawful for any person giving testimony to this board knowingly providing false information. Now that's according to section 22-9 of the Aiken Municipal Code. It requires that each infraction is a separate offense with a penalty of up to 30 days in jail and or a fine of $1,092.50. Any person that wishes to address the board, we ask that you please occupy the podium in front of the board. Please state your name and your address. Anyone that wish to receive copies of today's proceedings may contact the planning office at the listed telephone number. To the board, you have received copies of the minutes of the July 24th, 2018 meeting. Are there any corrections or additions?
Mr. Chairman, I'll move to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
I second.
Judy, second. It's been properly moved and second. Do we have any discussion? Those in favor, seeing none. Those in favor, show by a raise of the right hand. The motion is carried unanimously. Do we have any old orders?
We do. We do have the orders. We distribute them via email late on Friday, so if anybody did not receive and would like some more time to be able to review those and sign them, we could give you that. But we do have them here this evening, the ones that we distributed with some minor corrections.
Thank you. The old orders are the extent of the old business. We move directly into new business. I call your attention to application 18-92004. That's a petition from Crown Castle NG East LLC, and they're requesting a special exception to allow a telecommunication facility, and that's located in a GB property area within the right-of-way of the SCDOT, and that's at the northwest corner of Richland Avenue West and Pepper Way. To the city, has this been properly posted?
It has.
Any inquiries that you wish to share with the board?
We just only had one inquiry, and it was regarding the type of facility that it was. Confusion whether it would be this type of facility or a larger tower.
Thank you. Presentation.
First thing I would say, we renumbered this application from when it was, but none of the components of the application changed. So the application will be number 19-92001 officially on our records. Previously, a very similar application was approved by the board earlier this year for a location on a different portion or adjacent to a different portion of the same parcel. The applicant, after continuing to work with SCDOT, the DOT essentially changed their mind as to whether they would prefer the location, and the special exception that was granted was so specific that it didn't allow staff any administrative leeway. It was down to the foot, as the description in the orders in this case. So it would be reconsidered as a new application, therefore we gave it a new application number. We debated on whether just reevaluating it as the old application number, but we ended up deciding it the new application number.
Thank you. You read my mind and my notes because I thought we had dealt with this before.
That's correct. So we're treating it as a new application. What you have is a small cell facility, which is essentially a utility pole with what I would best describe as what looks like an upside down trash can on top of it. That is a small cell antenna providing cellular service to shorter range areas with communications back to a larger tower. The specific location is just at the northwest corner of the intersection of Pepper Hill Way and Richland Avenue West. We provided you in your packet a kind of a general view of what that area looks like, and then the applicant has provided here on the screen in front of you and the screen here a rendering of what that would look like at that location. The board shall review it as a new application pursuant to the special exception criteria that were responded to by the applicant. And in accordance, it meets all applicable. Staff would say that it would satisfy the special criteria established in the zoning ordinance for this type of facility. Again, waiving certain provisions that were designed for a larger tower as opposed to a utility pole, and those are enumerated in the considerations number 2 for your consideration.
Any questions from the board to the city?
Yes.
Nancy?
All right. I thought that was where it was before. That's not where it was?
If I go back to the larger photo here, the air photo, to the I would say on the other side of the driveway to the west of this. So if you're looking at the air photo, to the left of the entry driveway into Walgreens, there is a detention pond. It was originally going to be immediately to the street side of that detention pond behind the, essentially splitting the difference between the fence for the detention pond and the sidewalk. And that was a specific location considered. It's the same adjacent parcel, but this is adjacent to the Pepper Hill Way cul-de-sac entrance as opposed to the other side of the driveway, I guess in this case is the way I would describe it.
All right, and across the street is the eye place?
Correct. Yeah, to the east across Pepper Hill Way is an ophthalmologist.
On the side that not the eye thing is on, but...
It'd be on the Walgreens side of Pepper Hill Way.
All right.
Other questions from the board to the city? Thank you. Ms. Adams?
And actually, it's not Ms. Adams, sorry, representing these cases anymore for
She will identify herself, please.
I'm Tammy Jackson, Government Relations Specialist, representing Crown Casper. My address is 4690 Whitney Lane in Milburn, Georgia.
Because we had heard this before when you were on the southwest corner, Do you now have something in writing from SCDOT say that the northwest corner is okay?
I have emails that I corresponded with Bob Cartier with SCDOT. The permit that we have, they're allowing us to still use that same permit because the parcel is the same. They simply wanted us to move closer to the edge of the parcel.
Is that the reason for rejecting the other
Yes, sir.
south side close to the retention pond?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Question from the board to Ms. Jackson. Just for the record, would you state again the emergency response for your crew in terms of if there's trouble, problems with the system on the pole?
Yes, sir. We have a 24-hour monitored knock office that will respond to any calls for emergency or if the tower went down to immediately dispatch someone to take care of it.
And that crew is not located here in Aiken?
We have crews in South Carolina. I don't believe we have anyone locally.
Thank you.
But they are within an area where they could be here within, I would say, maybe an hour or two.
Thank you.
Yeah, excuse me. Essentially, DOT just said that's not an appropriate spot, move it over here.
Yes, ma'am. They originally approved that spot, and then they reconsidered and asked us to move it closer to the edge of the right-of-way and the edge of the parcel.
And wonder why they did that.
I'm not sure.
I mean, because it's just across the pond way, right?
It's just
I mean, it's
on the
where
other
the
side
other-
of the parking lot, actually.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions from the board to Ms. Jackson? Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have others to speak to the special exception requests? Final call, others to speak to the special exception requests? Seeing, hearing none, the chair would entertain a motion so we can enter a period of discussion.
Mr. Chair, I'll move to approve application number 19-92001 to have an approximately 37.5-foot tall, small cell telecommunications facility within the right-of-way located at the northwest corner of Richland Avenue West and Pepper Hill Way. The telecommunication facility must comply with the standards of Section 3.3.22 of the zoning ordinance, with the exception of setback, screening, and fencing conditions listed therein at Section 3.3.22, capital B4, lowercase b, Section 3.3.22, capital B5, and Section 3.3.22, capital B6, and final order to run with the land and be recorded at the Aiken County RMC office.
Do we have a second?
Second that.
John, second. It's been properly moved and second that we approve the special exception requests. Do we have any discussions? Hearing none, those in favor of said motion show by raising the right hand. The motion is carried unanimously. call your attention to application 19-93002 of various requests regarding the minimum side yard setback for an accessory structure in a RSS zone, and is at 524 Coker Spring Road. To the city, has this been properly posted? Were there any inquiries?
There were several inquiries, but all correspondence received officially regarding this has been attached to the agenda as distributed to the board.
Thank you. Any presentation for us, please?
Yeah, so what we have here, this is the applicant at 524 Coker Springs Road Southwest is a property, it's a residence attached to a stable between Coker Spring and Grace Circle. Along the south boundary of the property from Grace Circle to Coker Spring runs an equestrian easement. The property has, I believe, 5 different paddock areas within it for equestrian use. The applicant erected a, what I would call a metal roofed shade structure on the south side yard, which is at a different level than the rest of the property. There's a small retaining wall and essentially fits the size of that paddock. The applicant indicated that he did so to provide shade relief for horses when they're out during the day in that south paddock adjacent to the equestrian easement. Staff would define that as, backing up, the zoning ordinance defines any frontage adjacent to a street as a front setback, so it has a larger setback when it's adjacent to a street. The staff would not consider the easement along there as a front yard as we would other rights of way. It would be considered a side yard, which would require typically a 10-foot setback for accessory buildings. The applicant is requesting a variance to continue to locate that shade structure at that location, which is approximately a 1-foot setback. In response to some initial comments and a complaint received regarding the position of it, the applicant is proposing to move it back more flush with the residence. As you can see from the photo here, kind of there and behind it, you can see that it, from the Coker Springs side, it is visible there to the right of the residence. The applicant is essentially proposing to move that back more flush with the residence, so the front line of the residence, so you wouldn't be able to have it be as noticeable from the Coker Springs side. And I also took a picture here, and it's rather dark, which is actually kind of accurate at that location, that this is from the Grace Circle side. It tends to kind of blend in with the trees because it's a green color, so it's kind of hard to denote there, but it's kind of to the left of the gate entrance at that location. But the variance would be for the side yard setback, in this case for an accessory structure, which is typically 10 feet.
Now, this property is like in your normal city block, like a corner property where it has 2 front streets?
We would consider it, yeah, very similarly, except for we would, because the equestrian easement isn't a street, we would probably just, as staff, interpret the portion that fronts Grace Circle as being a front yard as far as setback is concerned, and kind of the area where the equestrian easement is between Grace Circle and Coker Spring. I believe we would consider that a side yard by the way the code is written.
And in addition, there's an equestrian trail to Hitchcock Woods.
Correct. Yeah, and it does provide, I think we measured it, it's roughly 15 feet wide, that equestrian trail, so there is a kind of built-in 15-foot buffer there between the 2 properties, but it is a commonly used trail.
Questions from the board to the city?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question
Karen.
for the staff. If the structure were made out of wood and attached to the existing stable, would this be would this be an issue? Because as an accessory building being totally detached is what's in violation of the zoning, but if it were built onto as a physical extension, would that be an issue?
In this case, at that same location, it still would be, because you would have, in this case, a side yard setback is the same for a primary structure as an accessory structure on the side yard. Where it relaxes in the code is the rear yard setback for an accessory structure versus a primary structure. So you would have, typically it's 20% lot depth for a rear yard. An accessory structure can be located, or accessory building can be located within 10 feet of a rear property boundary. So that's the difference. But no, so in this case, there still isn't sufficient room between the property line and where the structure is located,
Okay.
even if it were attached.
Even if it were built sort of as a addition onto the stables itself?
Correct, at least not in its current or proposed location.
Okay. Thank you.
This came to the planning department as a complaint. What was the nature of the complaint?
The complaint was primary aesthetic in nature. They felt that it didn't meet the design guidelines, predominantly due to its visibility and what the structure is made out of. However, in talking with the design review board chair, which would be a second part of this process for the applicant, as opposed to, so first, just for everybody, if something were to need a variance, that comes first prior to an overlay district design review board authority kicking in, so it would first need the variance. But it was primary aesthetic in nature, and working with the board chair, we do believe by setting it back further as the applicant has proposed, that it better meets the code as far as being less visible from a right-of-way, and therefore not subject to as stringent. So right now, where it currently sits, it would be in violation of the design guidelines and the setbacks that this board here. So
And this was from the adjacent,
this is from a property across Coker Spring.
because they could see too much of it.
Correct. It was primarily that view from Coker Spring that we had showed, where you could, see directly into the property, and it was more visible.
But
Mr. Bland, well, I couldn't get onto the property, looking from the gate, and trying to get an idea of the structure. It looked like a temporary building.
Correct.
Looked like something you put up and you can move it.
That's correct.
Move it most anywhere you want it to. That in itself, if I understand, would be in violation of any kind of design standard for this area. Is that right? Are these buildings permitted? Are temporary buildings permitted?
Similar buildings, as far as like a metal roofed shade structure, have been permitted on horse property. So there is some precedent for that. However, typically they're located in a situation that mostly the roof is seen as opposed to the legs and that sort of thing. So again, it kind of depends on the level of visibility as far as what we've seen as precedent for it. So if it were right out in front of the house, for instance, the design guidelines would probably not allow it. But if you were to locate it again in a position where it would be much less visible, you might be only be able to see the roof line and very minimally any sort of structure. Metal roof structures have been permitted by the design guides before, especially for shade on horse properties. We found a couple cases where those were permitted.
I certainly understand the idea of the shade and everything, but the building is, according to the documents, is roughly 41 feet long and 18 feet wide. And just eyeballing the distance he has from the retaining wall to the property line looks like about 19 or less than 20 feet.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yeah, it takes up essentially the full width of the
The
paddock.
width of the path.
Correct.
So if the temporary building was modified, would it be reasonable to expect that a shade building, a building providing shade could be same length maybe, but narrower in width to meet the setback requirement?
Yes, there should be, there is enough room for a skinnier structure that you could, yeah, it would essentially half of the structure width almost to meet the setback.
Ryan, how many horses are allowed on a lot that size?
Typically, per the ordinance, you're allowed 2 for the first acre, and that is what's there currently. What we didn't look into is, because it hasn't arisen yet, is what any sort of grandfathering that property would be allowed, because it does have additional stables other than that. But under the current ordinance, I believe it would be allowed 2, because that's kind of what's been the minimum consistent use on the property. But it's two for the first acre and then 1 for each additional acre. Typically, for an RSS property, that becomes unlimited if you meet the minimum size of the property, which just falls below the typical RSS minimum of 3 acres. So it typically, in these cases like this, is more of a legal non-conforming or grandfathered situation.
So there are 2 horses there now?
Correct, and the applicant could confirm that, but that's what staff saw when we went to the property.
The 2 horses greeted me when I went to visit the property, so. But I thought that the property had been grandfathered because it's, what, 9/10 of an acre rather than an acre?
It's, correct, it's 9/10 of an acre, correct.
It may have been the time of day when I visited the property, but if it's a shade for horses and some of the building was in the shade, it didn't make sense to me. Shade for shade.
Yeah, perhaps the applicant could better respond to that than I could, because I think maybe, yeah, I visited typically earlier in the morning, so the sun wasn't quite at its peak yet, so, yeah, it was fairly shady when staff was there, but the sun was fairly low.
Thank you. Other questions to the city from the board? Thank you. The applicant? Mr. Dabney?
I'm John Dabney. I live at 524 Copper Springs.
You've received a package from the staff. Do you wish to embellish on the package or just respond to and from questions from the board?
Well, it's pretty complete, but I will say this is not only shade, it's also shelter from a storm or rain or whatever, which is equally important. My horses are out at night right now, and that's where they need the protection, is from the rain, unexpected storms, which we've had a few of. Then during the day, we've got a whole, which I can't address right now, change of seasons, and the leaves are going to be gone, and the shade's going to be more important. And then at that point, they'll be out, instead of at night, they'll be out in the daytime. I'm sure that's probably as clear as mud to somebody that doesn't have horses.
Now, the building appears somewhat portable.
It is.
And I thought the staff indicated that you had considered moving it, at least for the design review.
I've already moved it.
Oh, you've already moved it?
Yeah. We moved it about 8 feet back.
Okay. But you still need the side setback variance?
We didn't change the side measurement.
Questions from the board to Mr. Dabney?
Why do 2 horses need such a big structure?
2 horses needed? Even just 1 horse would need it.
Would need
A shelter.
a shelter that large, that size?
Yeah, they have could show, I haven't got a picture of my horse, but he's 18 hands and very big, and it takes him about 14 feet to turn around. And he has a partner with him. It's a smaller horse, but between the two of them, it's like a big stall. Yeah.
And the people who owned the property before you were not here during the summertime, is that correct?
Yes, yes, she was here.
Was she?
And
Okay.
she still lives just up with
I'm talking about were the horses outside in the summertime when that person owned it?
I'm not really sure. They, also, it was, I was told anyway, that it was grandfathered in, and they kept up to 8 horses on the property.
Okay. Wow.
They had stalls enough for them, but just not much pasture.
Right. Okay.
Sir, with the 2 horses that you have, and you said one is, how many hands? Would you say 14?
18.
18 hands. And to maneuver in such a facility, you think you need that much width, some 18 feet to maneuver in. Any idea, any thought of in really extending what Ms. Daly said about a structure coming out from your stable out into that space where your temporary building is now to provide shade, in your estimation, wouldn't suffice and still meet the setback, the 10-foot setback? In other words, reduce your 20 feet down to 10 feet to work. You feel it wouldn't work at all?
Wouldn't work, and as far as adding it to the existing, there are different levels.
Yes,
and
sir.
this is down about 6 or 8 feet below the stable.
Right.
So it'd be kind of hard to attach something to the stable. I didn't even think about that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very strange property.
Well, I can understand with the space that you've got and the space you're occupying, leaves you that 1 foot offset from the property line. And what I hear you say is the horse that you have, the 2 horses you have, don't want to get caught up in there and panic or anything like
Right.
that.
Right, they have to have a little more room.
They have a little more room.
Yeah.
But I did notice you were utilizing that area also, it appears, to store equipment underneath. Is that
No,
right?
not really. I
Not
don't have
really?
anything but a small
Not your-
tractor.
Okay.
And the only other thing, hay you could put under it, I suppose, to help. But I don't really need to do that.
Right. Okay.
Mr. Dabney, when you turn the horses out into that area, are they then closed in with gates, or do they have free range of the property?
Oh, there are gates. There's a paddock gate at the far end of this structure, which is, that gate's going to have to be moved because we moved the structure back. Mm-hmm. And then there's a gate halfway through the structure, so that they could, I don't know how the measurements of that is. It would about cut the thing in half.
Mm-hmm. But when you turn them out, you're treating it sort of like a day yard, so they're turned out, they can move around, but it's really a contained
Right.
paddock that's covered?
I want them to be able to move around and stretch their legs in the paddock, and then if things get bad, they'll have the roof over their heads.
Mm-hmm. So the gates are never left open for them to choose to be in and out from under the structure?
Yeah, in and out of from the paddock into the structure.
Okay, so they do, so the courtyard area of the stables?
No, they won't be
They
allowed
don't get
there.
in there?
That's where I live.
Right.
Mr. Dabney, can maybe show me on that map, where are Steve and Monique Rabin? Where's their property? These are the people that are opposed to this.
Who again are we,
Steve and Monique Rabin?
Afraid I'm not very good at these
You don't know
maps,
the
but
neighbors?
On Grace Circle.
It's on Grace Circle, but I'm trying to remember if it's.
They live at the very end of the
Yeah.
street.
I believe, yeah.
Yeah, 117 Grace Circle.
I don't get where they are in relationship to this.
I think it's beside the, the way that horses can get through. I think it's between his property
Okay.
and this house.
Correct.
I wasn't,
Circle.
Grace.
Staff can confirm, yeah, it's the property that fronts both Grace Circle and the easement south of the subject property.
Mr. Dabney, did you own the structure prior to having it on the property? Was
No,
it something that you
no.
currently, so you bought it
I bought it.
specifically for the property?
How far back did you move it, Mr. Dabney? I'm over here.
Sorry. Right at 8 feet,
I'm sorry,
or just about 8 feet.
8 feet back. So it's in more visible to the people, the Ravens.
Which wouldn't be any more visible because there are trees all along there. And the only thing the fence is a solid fence and it's 6 feet. And the eaves of this thing are, I don't know, the total height is 11 feet. But the eaves are, there's only about, 4 or 5 feet that they can see. And mostly they're seeing the legs, which I've also, depending on how all this comes out, I would paint them black, which makes everything go away.
Would it make sense to lower to see where you see just the eave and the roof line, not the legs?
What's that?
Would the building be practical for you if you lowered the roof line or lowered the eave height so that the legs couldn't be seen and the green roof kind of blends in with the
We
existing nature?
considered that, but I think in order to hide the legs, it's going to be too low. This one horse, at 18 hands, he's way up there.
He's a big boy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Before you built this, could the horses, I'm just kind of a dumb question, but could the horses go right back to the fence if they wanted to?
It was open, and the paddock gate, they went through where this structure is. And now they walk under the structure to get to the paddock.
But they could hang out if they wanted to, close to the Ravens' house? I guess they're in opposition to the fact that they think that the horses are going to be closer to their property.
Oh, but I don't think they will be. But, I mean, the paddock has been there for a long time, and they're pretty close.
Okay.
I didn't know that was an issue with anybody, but
No.
That thing was there if it wasn't there.
No, because flies still travel the same distance whether they're in the barn or they're not. Yeah. Mr. Raven, would you have to handle the management of your horses much differently if you didn't have a structure that protected them from the elements, whether it's sun, rain? Would you
Well, they
then
might-
have to
they
change?
might have to be in the stall more,
Right,
which is not necessarily healthy.
right. Which would require more scheduling and on your part to bring them in and out. I'm assuming you do all of that yourself.
You may have answered this. How long have you been there at this address?
About a year.
And since the day you moved in, you've had the horses there?
Yeah,
Well, not the day, but,
not quite, but
yeah.
we did a lot of renovations on the house and the barn, and the horses were boarded, across the road.
Is there any reason why this location is preferred rather than some other place within the paddock so that you wouldn't have a variance, rear variance?
Not really. The paddock this is the smaller of two paddocks that I have now. Originally, they had 5. The bigger paddock has some shade and doesn't need it. And there's really no place to put it that it would help my cause.
Mr. Dabney, do you utilize that paddock in order to rotate so the grass will then,
That's my plan.
yeah?
I'm not having a lot of luck with growing grass right this minute, but
Mr. Chairman, I have a question
John?
of the city. Remind me, what is the purpose of the 10-foot setback at that location?
At that location, typically, the purpose of the 10-foot setback has generally been mostly for safety. Most structures, accessory structures that are of a concern is to get separation between them for the purposes of fire prevention. That way you don't have one of them catch fire, jump over to another one. Think about people storing gasoline, things like that in storage sheds. So you could be, essentially, if everybody had, accessory structures right up against their property lines in a corner, it could spread to 4 properties fairly quickly, and you'd, have an issue. So by providing that separation between them, it kind of helps by default meet, fire code issues with structures. That's the primary reason.
Access from emergency personnel, is that also a factor?
I believe it still would be a factor, yes, yeah. That would, more secondary probably to the building code issues, but it does provide some more reasonable side access as opposed to, just fighting from one direction if they were to have an engulfed structure.
And if this is granted, it would be, what, a 2-foot setback?
The staff would estimate probably safely call it a 1-foot setback because the base of the legs are, it's within 1 or 2 feet of the fence. It was hard to determine if the fence was right on the property line or on the interior side of the property line. So staff wrote it up as a 1-foot setback for the purposes of just kind of being on the careful side.
But that setback is not as big of an issue as far as safety concerned, because there's access to the property from both sides of his property, from Cocoa Springs and from the Gray Circle, right?
The property is unique in the location of this in that it does have the 15-foot equestrian easement that runs by it that acts as a buffer between that and the adjacent property that most properties would not have.
Right.
Any further questions from the board to Mr. Dabney? Thank you.
thank you.
Do we have others to speak to the variance request?
My name is Jan Radder, R-A-D-D-E-R, first name Jan, J-A-N. And I live at 111 Berkwood Place. If you could put that map up, that would be easy for me to show you how things are. Okay, this is my property right here. The Ravens live here. The structure is somewhere in here. My property sits above Coker Spring Road. I can see directly over the wall. I can see the base of this structure. In the beginning of June, I was out working in my yard, and I saw a bunch of guys putting up a metal structure. And I couldn't, for the life of me, figure out what it was, because I saw no building permit. I'd never seen a sign like I had to put up when I added on to my property for the design review of such a structure. And it just seemed like it appeared, and then I had no idea what it was used for. It's huge. It's 800 square feet. The horses that he has, when they go into the paddock area, they stay in the front paddock and they run around. And the dogs that he has 5 or 6 dogs that run out and bark every time I am in the yard, and they get the horses excited. He's not around a lot of the times when this happens. But the horses don't go under that metal structure at all. So my concern, just based on my experience with Mr. Dabney over the couple of years he's been here, is that he may decide to add more horses, because he can do that under this grandfather clause. And right now, I cannot use my back deck because the stench from this farm is so offensive that we can't use it. So I know he doesn't like what I'm going to say. I don't want the structure there at all. I just have this fear that there's going to be more horses. It's very large for 2 horses. I've never seen the horses really sitting under it. They're always out running in their front paddock when they're out. As far as shade goes, during the summer, there's plenty of shade. His argument was they never had to worry about this because the horses were never there in the summer. Well, that's when the shade exists, and the fall is when the shade doesn't exist as much. But there's a lot of trees there, and it really never, ever gets that much sun in that area, right by that right away where the horses connect into Coker Spring. So what I would ask the board to do is to deny the variance. I don't want the building there because of this concern I have with additional horses being in there and the value of my property going down.
Question from the board to Mr. Maddox.
Do you have horses on your property?
No, I do not. I have only 1/3 of an acre.
Okay.
It's a pie shape, and you can see it's like a pizza pie slice. But when I go out into my yard, I first smell it, and then I can see the whole structure because I can look over the wall, because my property sits up from Coker Spring.
Okay.
My line of sight is right over the top of the wall, right into his yard. Or the paddock.
Right.
And it's a good line of sight, too, because the dogs see me. They sit out on the porch, and as soon as I go out on my deck, they start barking, and he's got a little door that allows him to go in and out, so when he leaves, the dogs are allowed to come out at will. They bark at the horses, they bark at everybody, they bark at anything that moves, gets the horses running around in a circle at times.
I had to stand at your corner of your lot in order to see over the wall to see it.
I could see the whole
And
thing.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I too was warmly greeted by the dogs when I got a little closer.
That's because they know you're a dog lover.
Yes.
Okay?
Sir, how long have you lived at this residence?
Since 1992.
Okay. So since that time, it's been over 20 years,
Oh, yeah.
you've seen horses over there on that piece of property?
Yes.
Have you not?
Yes, I have.
Okay. What's the difference between then and over the past 20 years and now on this issue about the horses and the dogs and that type of thing?
Well, during the summer, like he says, there weren't many, if any, horses there, depending on who was, I guess, leasing stall facilities. I never really knew who owned the facilities at all. There was always different people in and out of the house there. And I never really got to know them. But I never really had an issue with them.
Up until?
until he came.
Up until the last couple of years?
Yeah,
or-
last couple of years.
Okay.
I'm a pretty tolerant person, just my patience is worn thin over the past 2.5 years or so that he's been there.
Is there a solution that maybe you would be open to, where he could have, Mr. Dabney could have his shelter, and then you would be happy with it too, maybe lowering it?
It would help. I mean, he says he has 2 horses. I don't know why he needs 800 square feet.
Okay.
And the thing is so high that when the sun is at the right angle, it shines right underneath that. It's not really, and so my fear was that maybe he's going to put up walls. I had no idea what it was for. This is the first I've heard it's going to be used for shade for horses. I thought this was going to be some sort of a building, you know. Eventually we're going to see walls on it and equipment stored there. I had no idea because he never even mentioned what he was going to do to me. You know, most of the neighbors will tell you, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Like the neighbors behind me when they redid the house, Len and Tom. But it's a complete mystery to me. It's just based on observation is what I'm giving you.
Any further questions from the board to Mr. Braddock? Thank you. Do we have others to speak to the variance request?
Jenny Stoker, 331 Kershaw Street, Southeast. I don't have a horse and I don't ride anymore right now, but I always did and am familiar with the property from the bridle path side. So I have a couple of questions because I am not exactly sure. Your suggestion to move the shed into the side paddock, was that, it's now moved away from the trail instead of moving it into the, didn't you mention, Ryan,
So it's in the same, within the same paddock, it is just slid further east than where it was within that same paddock, still the same distance from the path.
Gotcha, okay.
So more toward the Grace Avenue gate, I would say, into the property than it was previously.
Is it, and you might not know this, but if Mr. Dabney comes back up, perhaps we could ask him, how visible is it from where he is versus the people who are complaining about the way it looks? It seems to me like it's tucked pretty well behind there, so it wouldn't be a bother to him. He might not realize that it's unattractive if he doesn't have to see it, you know, as a part of his vista. But my real question is, I happened to be here at a meeting, it might have been a city council meeting, when Mrs. Kavanaugh, who I believe it was her father, owned that right-of-way of that trail, and she deeded it to the city to maintain it, I guess. And what I wonder about this shed is the runoff, and if the runoff is going to go straight into the trail, what is that going to do? I drove down and took a look at it. I know we hadn't had any rain very recently, but there's a pretty good little Grand Canyon going right down through the middle of the trail. And it's happened, you know, it happens sometimes. It's not only because of this roof, but I think the roof would certainly exacerbate it if all the water that used to go in that particular paddock is now dumped onto the bridle trail. And I was looking at this picture, and I'm unable to tell whether the roof of that shed actually extends over that privacy fence, or, I don't know, I can't see how close it really is, and if it would, you know, there's room for the water to go on his side, or is it dumping right into the trail?
So, Mr. Chairman, let's see, I could look, I have it up on, you have the view from the bridle path
Chair from the back.
on the screen there to the left. I think it's, let me see here if I have a,
Quite tell from that.
yeah. If I recall, it doesn't overhang the fence,
The
but
fence.
it comes pretty close to being at the, probably just to the inside of the fence.
So if it were somebody besides the city, that somebody would probably be here saying, I don't want that runoff on my property, but the city probably didn't think of it because they don't, it's not in their radar for that. So maybe y'all should think of it. And maybe, maybe there's another place on the property that wouldn't cause that much runoff, because that is really 800 square feet. That's the size of a mobile home or something, isn't it? I mean, that's a pretty good size shed. And I know the other paddocks are big. Maybe they could go somewhere else, would be my suggestion. Because I know you need a shed for the rain, as he said, as much as the sun. But maybe it doesn't need to be right there.
Any question from the
I
board?
hear what you say about the, excuse me, sir.
Go ahead. But
Because I walked the entire length from Grace, from Coker Springs up to Grace and back, and I'd noticed the washing, whether that's from Grace Circle and other runoff, I don't know. I hear your concern about the further concentration of runoff possibly getting into that area. Now, did you see anything, would you perceive any hazard to those on horseback using that right of way as it stands now?
Well, I think the only hazard would be, in my mind, I mean, now I walk my dogs through there, so I can, pick and choose my path.
Yeah.
And I think the only people that probably can't pick and choose their path would be somebody driving a carriage, and that's, I've done that in the past as well, and if it's washed out, you just, you better not go there.
Right.
And it is, but it would be a trail that somebody might use with their carriage. But you're right, there is, the runoff can be a problem. I think it's not going to be the only water there, but it's certainly going to add to it in a good storm.
Easement as it stands now, I mean, the easement is, the width is what it is, but it appears, just walking it appears to be narrower because of the growth on either side.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see walking the dog and so forth, but someone on horseback coming through there, I think would have a little more of a challenge somewhat to work through the ruts as well as the overgrowth.
Mm-hmm.
Would you not agree? I mean, but if it were widened and cleaned up, so to speak, to let both horses, dog walkers, and maybe carriages, could that be a possibility that carriages would use that if it were
Oh, they have,
opened
yeah,
up?
they always have. And I think what happens is in the summertime, the weeds come up on the side of the stable, and then the branches on those red tips come out a bit. But in the fall, it'll probably all get cleaned up because, there are a lot more horses in town, and that hedge usually gets, I don't know who does it, but somebody cuts the limbs on that hedge, and the weeds die back on the stable side, so it does get a bit wider, but still though, I don't know how that gully's probably going to be in the same place, so maybe somebody else who rides through there can answer that. I'm not sure. I would just say think of maybe another spot on the property, to be fair to everybody.
Thank you.
My name is Sam Cato, and I live at 622 Magnolia Street in the Horse District. I ride from 622 across Whiskey and down that path on a regular basis. I am very familiar with the property that Mr. Dabney owns because I suggested he buy it. It was formerly owned by Linda McLean. She was the master of the Aiken hounds. There were 8 horses on that property for many years. Lots of people lived in the apartment that is part of that barn where Mr. Dabney, excuse me, lives now. Mr. Dabney is going on 75. He has 2 horses. He has no intention of having any more. That is the least amount of horses that have ever been on that property. There were formerly 8. It has been reduced to 2 paddocks from 5. The area that he has placed that overhang is necessary to that lower paddock. There is no other place or no other reason to have it on the property. I was responsible for having that right-of-way cleared and Aiken City to take over it. We had a terrible storm in the winter that brought tremendous amount of damage to that area where it was impassable. So I called on the city and got a tremendous amount of help from a wonderful woman who I can't think of now. I didn't realize this was going to come up as an issue, or I would have brought notes. And she researched who actually still owned that right-of-way and did a lot of homework about it. And ultimately, the city has now taken over that right-of-way, and they came in at my insistence and cleared all of the debris because anyone living on the other side of Whiskey Road couldn't pass down that right-of-way, which has been used for years and years to get into Hitchcock Woods. So I think I'm about as familiar with this whole situation as anyone here. And I would suggest that the individual, and I can't remember his name, who has objected to all of this, has objected to just about everything that ever occurred on that property when Mrs. McLean owned it. He complained constantly about the hounds. He complained about everything. He doesn't like the dogs. He doesn't like the horses. There is no way his horses can, John's horses can ever get any closer to the property because it is behind a brick wall. They will never be able to get closer to the property. It seems that it offends no one except he has complained about absolutely everything for years and years and years of everybody that has been on that property. So unless, I don't know what else I can tell you. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have, but I have a pretty good history of that property.
Questions from the board, Ms. Cato?
Okay. So if there is a, when I was on, not the Circle, but I guess Cocoa Springs, is that right, looking today? And there was a gully-looking thing there.
Yes, indeed, and that happened, reoccurred many times before this structure was ever put there.
Right.
I mean, that's not an unusual situation for that particular right-of-way.
So my question is, when that happens, does somebody come in and take care of that from the city?
No, the horses walk around it, and ultimately it dries out, and enough horses come through there in the winter that it resolves itself, basically. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have others to speak to the variance requests? Others to speak to the variance requests? Mr. Dabney, you can have 3 minutes as rebuttal time if you choose. The chair will now final call for anyone to speak to the variance requests. Seeing here none, the chair will entertain a motion so we can enter a period of discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Judy?
I move that we accept application 1993-002 with the following conditions. Approval to allow an approximate 1-foot side yard setback on approximate 738 square feet, accessory shed accessory shade structure at 524 Cocoa Springs Road, Southwest, tax map parcel number 105-12-10-002. Require that all other pertinent requirements of section 3.4.2 are met, that the final order is recorded in the Aiken County RMC office.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Bud, second. It's been properly moved and second that we accept to approve the variance requests. Do we have any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I just
Karen.
wanted to clarify that should the variance be granted, it then is going to proceed to the design review board. Is that my understanding?
Correct, Mr. Chairman. So the process, yeah, would be required to file a design review application. Typically, accessory structures within the district can be up to administrative review, which is subject to planning director and chair review, as opposed to going to the full board. And then if it were rejected through that process, it would go to the full board. The design review board has essentially created a checklist of items that need to go to the board immediately versus those that could be reviewed administratively. Accessory structures are typically administrative in nature.
I guess my struggle with this is understanding managing a horse property and the way that Mr. Dabney is ensuring the care of his horses. They're doing what they need to do as far as movement. He's making sure that they're sheltered, et cetera. It seems that the horse management, the horse property is not the issue. It's always being a horse property. So listening past that, it seems that this stemmed from an aesthetic objection, first and foremost, which sort of where I'm struggling, because I think if, from a design standpoint, I completely understand the structure, I understand the placement, the utilization on the property. I think because of the specific area, as I sort of alluded to in the beginning about could it be more aesthetically pleasing, brown like the stable, sort of incognito, if you wish, and maybe it wouldn't have been on someone's radar quite as strongly as it is. It's where I'm kind of struggling about setting a precedent, but at the same time allowing what's needed for on the property.
Mr. Chairman, isn't that the point of them going before the other board? For them to take care of that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Chair, I want to ask Ryan, if this variance were granted, would it run with the land or would it run with the current owner? In light of the fact that right now we see a temporary building up there which has not been approved or reviewed by DRB.
So the approval, particularly as moved so far, would run with the land. The board does have the authority to place a condition on there that it would run with ownership. You can further restrict that if the board were to choose to do so, but the motion on the table, it would run with the land automatically unless otherwise stated.
Mr. Chairman?
Nancy?
If this property did not have horses on it, I'm asking myself, would this be something that I would approve the variance, to have a structure that close to two neighboring properties? And my answer to that, forget about the horses, my answer to that is no, because we have a zoning variance, we have a zoning laws with how far things can be built from the structure. And if these people that were coming up against this, these two people, the letter that we have here and this other man lived across town, I'd be like, well, you're not next door. I'm not concerned about what you think, I mean, I don't mean what you think, but these people live right next door. And I'm having a problem with this because of that. Forget about the horses, just about the structure being that close.
I don't think you can forget about the horses, though. I mean, that's why the stables and everything else is there. I mean, that's what it was sold for when it was divided from the original Round Point property.
When
and
it was
everything.
sold, he knew that he was going to have horses, he had the property to look at, and now he's asking for a variance for something that he's creating, that wasn't created by anyone else.
Right.
And I'm just looking at all the conditions here, and I just don't see that it meets all of them.
I agree largely with you. I think, with all due respect to Mr. Dabney, it's almost like he got a deal on the structure and he crammed it in there without any thought to design or how it looks or runoff from the roof. I think if there's some way that we could diminish the look of it, it might be a better thing.
And the size and the location?
Yes, it's, to me, that's just, it's jammed in there with a shoehorn, and it's, I don't think it's, needs to be so tall, but I don't have horses, I don't know. 18 hands or not, I don't think, you know, I think it could be a little lower, maybe a way to deal with the runoff a little more strategically. It was a very good point. Coming off that roof, there's nothing impeding the water flow, and it may even aggravate the runoff in the right-of-way.
Mr. Chair, to really understand these 6 criteria, these 6 decision criteria just outlined, these criteria were placed or part of state law, and all 6 have to be met. Is that correct?
Right.
Yes.
The problem I'm having with this, and I appreciate what Mr. Dabney is doing, and certainly been around horses most of my life, but item number 3 of the 6 criteria is what I'm wrestling with. That due to these conditions, the application of the ordinance to this particular piece of property would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the utilization of property. And the application of this ordinance, to me, in light of what's been there and what's been going on there for quite a number of years, having horses, even more than 2, the variance has not restricted the use of the property. Now, granted, the shed, yes, but the overall use of the property has not been unreasonably restricted, in my opinion. So that's my problem, item number 3 of the 6 criteria.
I guess my thoughts is that in the past, and I think we've heard other concerns about this piece of property in the past, and it has housed up to 8 horses without a shed. The location of the shed is not the same as a corner lot where it's affecting Cocoa Springs or Grace Circle. It just happened to be on the side of the equestrian trail, which again is a buffer. The reason for the 10-foot setback is to create a buffer between the next piece of property. But we have an equestrian trail that's there, is permanent, and So it's not affecting the next door neighbor directly. And since the previous owners did not feel their horses need, but if this owner feels that his horse needs additional shade, I think I'm kind of like Bud. Maybe it should only run with this applicant and not run with the property.
I agree with that.
Should this applicant sell, something happen to the property, the shed goes away.
I agree with that.
Would you consider an amendment to your motion
Yes.
that the variance run with the
Current
current
owner.
ownership of the
Right.
land?
Exactly.
Well, Mr. Chair,
As a
I'll make
second
that, I'll make that as an amendment then.
And I say,
And that's okay with the
Yes.
motion maker.
definitely so.
And you were the second, you second the motion, didn't?
Yes, I was taking her initial,
And so she's accepting the amendment to the motion, and you agree as a person seconded.
Yeah.
Do we have any other discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of the amended motion, show by raising the right hand.
that's running with the land.
Running-
Running with the ownership.
Right.
The ownership. For those opposed, same sign. The motion is carried 4-2. Mr. Dabney, you can confer with the planning department for the result of our decision. I call your attention to application 19-93001, a variance request regarding the minimum lot size in the HD Horse District zone, in particular 785 Grace Avenue. The variance request is to divide the lot into the property into 2 lots of less than 10 acres. To the city, has this been properly posted?
It has.
Any inquiries that you wish to share with the board in addition to the ones you passed out?
You say you, just that, yeah, you have received an additional memo from staff with 5 different pieces of email staff received from 4 different individuals. One was a clarification to a previous email. So you have 3 additional in support of and 2 additional in opposition to. Staff will label the staff memo and additional comments as Exhibit E for the record.
Presentation.
Property, as described, is west of Two Notch Road between Meade Avenue and Grace Avenue Southeast. The applicant is requesting a variance from section 4.3.1 of the zoning ordinance, which is the design standards for non-residential properties. Horse District properties have in that table, a 10-acre minimum. The subject property, the applicant wishes to divide the subject property into 2 parcels that are less than that 10-acre minimum, a roughly 6.35 acre lot and a 3.65 acre lot. As seen in applicant's submittal labeled attachment B, which on the map of the overhead is the right, the right-hand photo there. The smaller of the two parcels proposed is a northern parcel, which currently contains a residence, which is a essentially kind of a continued special exception, but was there prior to the current HD zone district, and so it'd either be considered legal non-conforming use or a special exception that's continued, one or the other, but may remain there basically until the residence would be no longer be there. Typically, a residence is allowed by special exception in the horse district. The primary use of the property is for equestrian uses in the horse district, as opposed to most districts that are more residential, where the house and the residence is primary. So that's unique to the horse district. The southern property currently mostly consists of stables and paddocks, and has been traditionally a more commercial use, and that would be the proposed 6.35 acre lot. So the again, the the variance request would be to the 10 acre lot minimum within a horse district property.
Do we have questions from the board to the city?
Are all of the lots or pieces of property, as I read in the zoning ordinance in the horse district, have to be 10 acres or larger?
Correct. So that's the zoning ordinance requires 10 acres or larger for horse district properties. However, there were a number of properties at which time the horse district was zoned such, and the ordinance written, this was the 1999 ordinance that I'm speaking of, the most recent version. There are a number of properties that are smaller than 10 acres that have been grandfathered in essentially as such, but they could not split without a variance. However, they could combine into a more conforming situation of less than 10 acres.
Is that what I'm looking at in, I believe this is Exhibit C, this map? At the top right, you have all these very small properties that are HD. They're under 10 acres.
That's correct.
An example of these, and there seems to be quite a few of them.
That's correct.
So I look at the zoning map here by lot, the property in question is 10 acres, and there's an adjacent piece of property there, 8.3, and you said that was 8.3, and this is 2.5. If I'm looking at this right, all these were, those the less than 10 acres were grandfathered.
Correct, yeah, and that was an exhibit presented by the applicant as part of his application materials, but yeah, the acreages are accurate as depicted on there. Yeah, so there are a number of properties within the vicinity of the property that are zoned horse district and less than 10 acres in size.
Do we have other questions to the city from the board? Thank you, Ryan. Mr. Rivera?
Hello, I'm Rhett Rivera. 1032 Clark Road is my address. As my application points out, and first I'll thank Mr. Bland for bringing up that it was a 1999 zoning ordinance that came after I owned the property, but supposedly we were all contacted prior to enacting this zoning, which I was not. Minimum 10 acres in the HD zone district. I am the only 10-acre property there. All of the others range from between 0.3 acres and 5.5 acres that are privately owned. Other than that, you have a racetrack, a polo field, and a retiring harness track. I have responded to all of the questions here, and the property is extraordinary and exceptional in that it is the only 10-acre parcel within a 10-acre zoned area. Other properties that are larger, that other than the 8.3 next to me, are zoned RSS. They don't require the minimum 10 acres. I've pointed out through my application, and I don't feel I should have to go through every page of it because everybody has it, that when this was first created in the mid-1990s, and my mother was a part of it, it was because there was a developer who wanted to put 1-acre lots through the horse district. The stopgap at that time, 10-acre minimums, that was not fully enacted till 1999. Almost 4 years later, 3.5 years later. It did not look forward to an evolution within the horse industry in that area. If you look at my Exhibit A, I think it was A, showing the way everything 1998. The way everything was zoned in 1998 when this was being conceived, put together, turned into the HD zoning. If you take out the public, the trust, the racetrack, the polo fields, the harness track, the privately owned properties, what was commercial encompassed better than 40% of the stables that are in that area. These were businesses. These were racing stables that operated in there, be it only seasonally, 4 to 5, 6 months, and then they'd be empty. But these were actual commercial operations. And you'll see that in the yellow, it's the next one, Brian, if you could, please. There, in the yellow, okay, the light blue is the big side. The darker color is what was commercial in 1998. The yellow were privately held personal stables. Nothing, no businesses running out of them, just people having their pleasure stables. If you go to the next slide, it shows the way it looks in 2018. There is virtually one commercial racing stable left. One. It's owned by Alice Knowles, who wrote a letter supporting this variance. Alice is also responsible for what is part of the Whitney Trust Farms right here in renovating them to keep them for the racetrack, which is right here. This is rented out basically to anybody who wants to be there right now. It's rented to the racing stable, which belongs at the track barn because it's the president of the racetrack. She's going to be moving. This is an empty racing stable that was Stonerside, which has been for sale, is empty, is not promoting the equestrian benefits of the horse district whatsoever. So there is virtually one racing stable left, commercial racing stable, in that entire horse district. Everything in yellow is being used for other disciplines, pleasure riding, could be 3-day eventing, could be fox hunting, it's every other discipline out there. There's no more commercial. Yet I have what is a 10-acre commercial property. When I had the racing stables there that Dogwood, Ron Stevens had, I had 26 more stalls that burned 5 years ago. Without those 26 stalls, that is not a commercially viable, it's an open lot. It's just sitting there, which I can let grow to 20 feet high in grass. It's just not a viable anything to promote the equestrian industry. And with residences, with residents. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Mr. Giobbe's is next door right over here. 7, 8, 9. All of these have residences on them. Of these properties, again, being used for horses right now, to actually people who have horses who ride them, they're on their property. We have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These don't have anybody on them. They don't ride their horses. Mr. Winterstein is not here. He doesn't live in this state. He doesn't come down. And when he does, he doesn't have any horses. These are properties that are sitting there without anybody using them to promote the equestrian uses of the horse district, which is what the comprehensive plan is trying to do. Get more use. You put 2 parcels there, you have parcels that are there. Oh, and Mr. Wetzel has the horse shows going now at the steeplechase track. 8 stalls he built there. They have thousands of horses that come through. These are people who can add to the economic impact of downtown Aiken instead of buying outside of town or just coming in for a weekend and leaving. They want to be in town. They want to have some place where they can ride. If everybody else is sitting there with 0.3 acres to 5 acres, and I've got 10, this is not something that's drawing more people, more activity into the horse district. It is not something that's benefit and helping to go to the future of what the comprehensive plan is there to do, preserve and promote the equine industry here. If I may, I would like to address some of the letters that have come in. Again, I've got Alice Knowles. She has the one remaining commercial race stable. She is a trainer on the racetrack. She has been on the track for decades. She's a vice president of the Aiken training track. She's doing the restoration of the Whitney Trust barns to try and maintain and promote and carry forward the heritage of the Aiken historic area. Mr. Wilderson, who has 5 properties surrounding me, they actually use their properties with their horses. They are there. He has commendations from the city for what he has done with his properties surrounding mine, and he is promoting it. Then I have my brothers next door, who, as I find his letter, okay, he brought up a couple of interesting points. First thing is to say this was adjudicated previously and rejected. Well, in fact, we went through this before, 10 years ago, and I did say then that the flavor of the horse industry was changing and was going to be changing over the coming years. I pointed out then that the racetrack was declining, that other disciplines were coming in, and all I am is 10 years later saying, here it's happened. But since he brought it up, that ruling from the BZA went through the courts to mediation. Several of you were in the mediation. It was agreed to in mediation. We came out of that, went to City Council for ratification, and Mr. Paterniti decided that he was going to renege on the agreements that he made during our mediation, which was approved and agreed to. We had several things in there. My brother also points out that this is going to change somehow. It's going to have negative consequence and dilute the horse district. It does nothing to dilute the horse district. It's exactly the same uses as are possible and potential for the horse district. It's just putting it out there where the potential people to utilize it will have access to it. It's actually promoting what the horse district is zoned for. It is not diluting it. If his concern is the Aiken training track, as he says here, if the race industry were no longer viable, again, I pointed out 10 years ago that the Whitney Trust properties, the training track, which are all zoned the same HD, as the .3 acre HD property, then something should be done to look at those properties and say, we need to protect them, more of an open space designation. They should not be zoned the exact same as a .3 acre property. But that's, he brought that up, not me. The racetrack is there at the moment, 73 acres. The Whitney Trust is there at 35 acres. And that's a whole nother issue that he's brought up. He talks about the character and sustainability of the horse district. Well, I think that's what I'm trying to promote and offer more opportunity and viability for. That's exactly what I'm looking at. And he did put his property into an open land conservancy. He does say here that he, when he inherited it, he did it. No, he waited 14 years. He's just done that recently. So. But either way, it's to plan forward, not do what happened in 1996 to 98 and 99, which is to fix something right then without looking forward to how it was going to grow and how you could best use it to go forward with your plan. Precedent for other future variances he brings out. Well, I'm the only 10-acre privately owned property there. I don't know how it can be a precedent. Anybody else? I think Mr. Winterstein mentioned that as well. Well, his is zoned RSS. These are not properties that are comparable. They are totally different animals altogether. And if I'm the only privately owned 10-acre parcel, I can't be setting a precedent for anybody else because there's nobody to set a precedent for. Then, Mr. Winterstein, he's concerned that this doesn't promote equestrian use. I think, as Mr. Wilderson said, having two parcels out there to promote and be able and encourage viable horse properties is much better than having one underutilized piece of property, as Mr. Winterstein's is, as some of these other properties where they just sit there and hold it because it has a stable on it and it's open ground. Now, there will be those who just want open ground, but that does not fulfill the mandate of the comprehensive plan to promote equestrian use. It's a nice thought, and I am not trying to delete or denigrate or take away any open space. The open spaces are still there. I've also offered to put a deed restriction on the larger parcel so that it could never be divided again. I've gone above and beyond trying to do what I can to promote what is the horse district and what is in the comprehensive plan to make more viable opportunities for people to utilize horse properties. Any questions?
Since you have operated for 10 years, the 10 acres, I'm trying to, what do you want?
Two parcels. 10 years ago, I actually had a very functioning 37-stall racing stable going there. Then I lost 26 stalls to a fire. It's just open space sitting there now. It's a parking lot. You know, we clean up stalls, we let people board there, and they come in and they go out. This is not something that's promoting the equestrian uses of the horse district. This is not something that's bringing people in. This is not something that's helping the city economically. This is not, it's not doing anything. It's just sitting there as ground, which I could walk away from half of it and just let it grow because it's just ground. I mean, it's not doing anything. Before, it was a viable, functioning commercial racing stables. Or I could put the close to $1 million into building a new racing stable, but the racing is going down where the stalls aren't needed.
Yeah, I remember the fire, and you really exercised public safety, Aiken public safety with that fire.
I'm sorry they lost a fire engine to that one.
But I'm I'm trying to get to the hardship that did we create a hardship
No,
for you?
no.
No.
A hardship was represented, which is again represented here, but that's the false news. There is no financial hardship. There is no hardship. I was not in the Trump Tower with the Russians. Any of this, that's nonsense that is flack, and I try and deal with the facts. There is no hardship, no economic hardship. The only hardship is going out there and cutting the grass.
No, I don't understand, and maybe it's just my way of thinking. I haven't understood the advantage of subdividing since you have been successful.
If you wish to have a future with the horse district, and you wish to have a promotional that's bringing people in and utilizing it, promoting the horse industry, the equestrian industry, to have Mr. Winterstein's property sitting there with a nice stable, but nobody's ever there. To have me sitting there, but nobody's there. To have my brother lease his out for 3 months a year, but otherwise nobody's ever there. This is not promoting and bringing people into the horse district. It is not doing what the comprehensive plan says it's there to do. It is not there what people want to maintain it to do. I have letters from all of the people who ride in that district. I have the letters from the people who use it, and they are all supportive because, and again, Mr. Wetzel's brought in thousands of horses for weekends here and there. These are people who would like to live in Aiken. They don't want to live outside of Aiken. They want to live in Aiken. They want to be able to utilize these properties. But as long as there are these big things that are way beyond what they require, and those are RSS properties other than mine, those are RSS. But if you want to bring people in here to utilize it the way this comprehensive plan says that we're there for, and that's what we maintain the dirt roads for, and that's what we're trying to bring people, and that's the beauty of Aiken. If you don't offer them access to it, if they can't have it, you're not doing what this says.
How is, I'm really not a horse person, I'm not following this. How is subdividing it going to make it more useful?
10 acres is too large to maintain for what you can do on it. You're just wasting money maintaining. If it was 20 acres, well, there's a farm. These 5-acre parcels that people can be on, that's a maintainable, usable, functioning size. You look at the ones that are sitting there empty, like Mr. Winterstein, it's just a big space. It's a hole in the water.
So what you would do is you would sell them
Well, the whole thing's
both
been
to
on
me?
the market for 25 years. I'm not even thinking about selling it. Nobody has approached me about buying it.
But why
Nobody's
would
done
divide,
anything.
I'm really
Yeah.
lost. Why
But-
is dividing it
Because you
gonna
can
make
take
it more usable?
somebody could take half of it and use it.
Why can't they rent half of it now or do
Well,
whatever?
right now, because there's nothing, there's an old barn from 1970s, which could fall down, could be taken down, whatever. When I lost the 26 stalls, this is one that's there to be put together and used now. For instance, the property on the corner of Autobahn and Two Notch. You know the property, where all the trees were taken down, the house was redone, the barn was put up. Here's something beautiful that could be on that property and be a functioning equestrian property, beautiful horse property. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to spend $1 million or $2 million. Somebody could, and could actually do something to benefit that area and promote it.
So in essence, the property would be divided to then be sold, so someone else would then...
Not to be sold. I've got somebody in one of it who's got a multi-year lease. I can't just kick him out, no. You know, that's...
Once again, why can't, go
Well,
ahead,
it's
I'm
not,
sorry.
it's not in the lease. This is not to try and sell it. That's not the purpose. But it is to create properties that are viable within the horse district.
But it was viable previously with a barn in place, understandably it burned, but would it not fiscally make sense to then rebuild a barn, understandably
If I
not
wanted to
for
put $1
race.
million into it that I had for stalls that are no longer needed because the racetrack doesn't use them.
I understand that the racetrack doesn't use it, but I know with the eventers and the dressage riders and the show jumpers that do come to town are looking for spaces that have an area.
If they can stay there and call it their own, yes.
Well, a lot of them do lease properties from other people. I guess my point being it would be a viable.
But I would have to build the stalls. I'm 65 years old. If I want to wait 25 years to get my payback out of that, and make it break even, that could be good. My children don't want to have anything to do with this property. I've got 2 kids, so I have to devise that somehow. And I'm not going to be there to wait and get that money back to break even, just to preserve Aiken with 26 more stalls. I'm trying to do something that can help preserve it for Aiken. I turned down the one offer I had on that property, and they were going to level everything and put a 40-foot high house there. I turned that one down. So, I mean, I'm trying to do it for that area, but I'm only going to go so far.
If I understand the zoning, the horse district zoning, though, if someone wanted to do just what you indicated, i.e. build a house, that would have to
It would have to go
go
through
through
everybody here.
this board.
Correct.
Would it not?
Yeah, correct. New residences require
Okay.
special exception in the horse district from the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Okay.
And
All of them-
planning, I believe.
Say again?
I think, and from planning, they have to get approval for that, so.
I think a lot of us been in Aiken a while, have seen the changes in our horse community, and from seasonal thoroughbred horse training and to now what has been going on over at the Bruce's Field. And I can remember growing up and looking at Bruce's Field, and nothing went on there
Right.
when I was growing up. But anyway, Mr. Wetzel and others have done remarkable things to make that facility a year-round facility, not just in steeplechasing, so to speak, but other
Absolutely.
eventing. And my question would be, in light of what has been constructed there on Bruce's Field, take your 10 acres, and I'm not advocating build a mini what they've done over there, but a support facility that would not only support the Aiken training track as did the Green Tree Stables did for many, many years that was
Right.
on your property, but also support the events that are going on at Bruce's Field. I know there's been a lot of discussions at the Aiken training track about trying to revitalize it and
Right.
make more income from it and so forth, and events that would go on there. But my question would be, with the 10 acres that you have there now, if there were barns built to support some of these other events. I know it takes money. I hear you loud and clear on that. But my point is, with the 10 acres versus, and one parcel versus 2 parcels, I'm trying to
Okay.
figure out the difference there and trying to make it support the existing
Right.
horse industry as well as what's happening.
The racetrack barns right now are more than enough stalls remaining, even though stalls have been taken from the racetrack for other disciplines. But the attendance at the racetrack has gone down. Right now, again, the president of the racetrack is leasing Mike Freeman's old barn when the racetrack barns are sitting there empty, stalls are sitting there empty. She should be moving back over there. But that's going to leave more empty stalls over here for other disciplines. The racetrack doesn't need more stalls right now. It needs the horses to fill the stalls. And with Alice doing what she's doing to renovate the Whitney Trust barns and getting those back up and running,
there are plenty of stalls. We can double the number of horses we have on the track right now and have stalls for them that are the racetrack stalls. And they should go to the racetrack because then the revenue goes to the racetrack to support it. So we don't want to take away from that. We need to push those towards, if I had racehorses on my property, I'd be pushing them to the track itself. Let them get the benefit from that. That's where it belongs. Too far from Bruce's Field to actually close in with it, but I've done all I can do. I have stalls and paddocks I have a paddock for every stall. I've done all I can do. And all I can get is the overflow from there. I can get people who come in for hunt week and they want to rent stalls for a little while. And it's like I said, a big parking lot. That's it. Which I spend, a lot of time going around repairing fences, repairing the grass, cutting the grass, getting all the irrigation going, taking the trees, just keeping it looking nice for the horse district. That's all it's doing right now. If it were in 2 parcels, other people can come in potentially. These are other viable properties that somebody can come in for.
To buy.
To lease long-term, to do something, but I'm not going to do it. And as one parcel, it
But why
doesn't,
can't you
because it's
lease-
all zoned, it's one parcel. I have a residence over here that's being taxed and insured as a commercial property, which should not have been done because it should never have been allowed in the HD as part of that. It should have been a little parcel off to the side anyway. But the house, there's a house and a little cottage and barn, all sitting there with 6-stall barn, 6 paddocks, a nice little field, and that whole piece is sitting there. Then there's this huge wide driveway down the middle, and then there's the other side. It's now just a big open field, really. Put some fences up so you can turn horses out, and it's a waste for the equestrian industry. I'm not going to do anything with it. I am more than willing to just let that half grow up and not think about it, because it costs more to maintain for the little bit you get out when you offer somebody a stall. I'll just let it go. That isn't going to benefit the horse district at all either. I mean, that's just sort of, after 10 years of watching that, and after 5 years without that after the barn burned, that's just where it's at. One side I can keep and maintain, keep the horses in, keep the house. The other side to me is just there.
Mr. Chairman,
Judy?
I saw a for sale sign up, so is it?
It's been
is it-
there for 25 years.
Okay, is that for the whole piece of
Yes,
property then?
that's one property.
Okay,
Yeah.
so right now it's all or nothing.
Well, that's the way it's always been, regardless of what anybody has said in the past. That's the way it's always been.
Does anybody live in the house?
Yes, right now it's rented. And that's on their annual leases for that. So again, they just moved one moved out and the other moved in 2 weeks ago. So even at that, if somebody came to me today and said they wanted to buy that, I'd say, there's a 1-year lease on this. So.
They wanted to buy the whole property?
Pardon?
They wanted to buy the whole?
No, if anybody were to come in and want to buy
Okay,
right now. Nobody has approached me for anything.
oh, okay.
I'm trying to look ahead to the future of how this property is going to work for the horse district. Again, the one time that somebody came to me, he wanted to level everything, kick the race horses out, build brand new, and he ended up building on Dolly Boswick's property that big mansion thing. And that's what could have been there if I had said yes to him.
Mr. Rivera, I'm going to cut through to the chase. I can't get beyond thinking that you want the variance to approval to subdivide for financial gain.
And what would that be? Nobody has offered me anything. I couldn't get more for it as 2 parcels as I can for one. I have no, what happens in the future, somebody might come to me in 2 years if this is 2 parcels and say, I want the whole thing. You don't know what's going to happen with that. We had somebody in 2 years ago who wanted to buy the whole block. It's, we don't know. Somebody may want it all back together and have a big farm. We can't judge that. actually did have somebody who was trying to sell his property in Virginia. He wanted to buy the whole block.
Other questions to Mr. Rivera from the board?
Mr. Boone?
Mr. Chairman, member of the board, I'm Sid Boone, McNair Law Firm in Charleston.
What was your last name, sir?
Boone, like Daniel Boone, and I represent Mr. Revere. I think this whole thing can be summed up. The purpose of the ordinance, it says, a variance may be granted by the board if the board concludes that strict enforcement of any design or performance standards will result in an unnecessary hardship to the applicant, and that by granting the variance, the spirit of the ordinance will be observed, public health, safety, and welfare will not be diminished, and substantial justice will be done. It's true, if 2 properties would be easier to sell than 1. It's true, one of them is residential, and if it be taxed as residential, it could be used and insured as residential. Somebody else could take the commercial side, and Bill Barnes has suggested, or really make that a commercial operation, an equestrian hospital or something like that. But when you look at Exhibit D or C, and this is the only 10 acre, nobody's complaining about these 1, 2, 3 acres, horse districts that are not 10 acres. This is an anomaly to have the only 10 acre parcel. So that's not a financial hardship, but it's a hardship. Because you're competing in the market. If you wanted to sell your residence, you wanted to sell the commercial site, you would have 2 parcels to sell. It just makes sense with what's changing in the horse district that was written almost 20 years ago.
Yeah, but
and it recognizes that it's not going to be, I don't think it's going to be detrimental. You're not going to see a difference when you ride down the street. It's going to look the same. You won't even see the property line unless they build fences.
Yeah, but Mr. Boone, when Mr. Rivera first started, I asked him about the hardship that the ordinance has caused him and the reason for requesting a variance. And if you read further in terms of our obligations, we cannot, by state statute, offer a variance for financial gain. I explained I'm trying to get off of those 2 points.
May I point out one other, which is in not doing something for economic gain, the city cannot put me into a financial hardship by making me spend more and more and more to maintain something that's just there. Not impose a hardship upon me any more than I can ask for you to do something because
that was the
of
reason
hardship.
for my question about what is the hardship that the current ordinance has caused to you. Yeah.
It's brought me back to sit in Aiken for many years just so that I can maintain that, whereas I was not having to do that.
Any questions for Mr. Rivera or Mr. Boone from the board? No? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have others to speak to the variance requests?
My name is Edward Giobian. I live at 541 Grace Avenue Southeast in Aiken. I believe that you are in, you have a copy of my letter, which is in opposition to Mr. Revere's application, and I would only echo Mr. Ogletree's comment for a short while ago that variances may not be granted by reason of economic or financial hardship or to enhance the value of the property. Looking to the argument that was presented, and it's apparently quite clear that granting this variance would be for the purpose of enhancing the value of the property. Again, you must decide whether there is sufficient hardship involved to override the requirements that are necessary to grant a variance. It would appear that that is not the case. I also have a letter from Mr. and Mrs. Winterstein. I don't know if that reached you in time, but it reads as follows. Dear Mr. Bland, we own the property at 726 Grace Avenue, known as Kelsborough House. Our property is across property that Mr. Revere is trying to apply for a variance to allow him to subdivide his property. We purchased our property in 2001, expecting what is known as a horse district never to be broken up by subdivision. If Mr. Revere is granted his subdivision request, we believe that our area of Aiken would be subject to the same variances, thereby totally spoiling the character of Aiken. We are unable to be at the hearing. We are present in our home in Pennsylvania. Please take this email as our most strenuous opposition for a variance. I would like to also correct one other thing that was, I believe, Mr. Revere stated earlier. The Wintersteins do not have horses on that property. When they are here and come down for the winter, they do have horses on that property. I would point out to the commission that it is important that do not be subject to the whims of what may be temporary or immediate concerns at the expense of longer-term considerations. And I would point out a number of instances where the reaction to some immediate concerns would have had extraordinarily negative consequences. I would point out that a number of years ago, the city actually proposed paving some of the dirt roads. As I understand it from Mr. Scott Revere, who opposes this, his mother, Mrs. Revere at the time, and you may be able to verify this, was instrumental in preventing that. The Winthrop Field was saved from 24 houses on quarter-acre lots by people who had the foresight to preserve that. At the time, there was a great demand for housing. That wonderful piece of property across the street, which was slated to be a low-income housing development, was saved by one vote on city council. At another time, in the express interest of so-called development, it was proposed that an expressway be built through the woods. Citizens Park, there was a proposal to build a housing development there. All this was in response to demands for housing, for development. Again, it is extraordinarily important that we not lose sight of the fact that this application, in essence, strip away all the arguments. It is brought down to one thing, and that is to enhance the value of the property, and that must be a decision that you must make to justify that. I would suggest, and I would support the last paragraph from Mr. Wetzel. It states as follows. Perhaps Mr. Revere's application should be part of a larger discussion or more appropriately tabled until proper consideration is given to the ramification of allowing additional horse district commercial, in parentheses, properties of less than 10 acres. I think that we should not allow piecemeal decisions to be made that affect the entire horse district. And I think, again, it is important, and we have to put this in a proper context. Everyone has considerations, and we've heard the arguments in prior times when this applicant has presented application for subdivision. It was turned down, that it was for various purposes, such as estate planning, and his particular hardship imposed upon him. That can be replicated throughout Aiken, but we cannot allow individual intentions as good as they may be for personal reasons, to allow our town to be degraded because of what may be perfectly good personal considerations, but are not in the best interests of the town as a whole. As I stated in my letter, the Horse District is a unique character in an unusual place, in an urban environment, along with the Hitchcock Woods, and it represents an integral part of the charm and attractiveness of Aiken as a whole, and it should not be diminished in any way. The large open spaces in the Horse District, as well as other areas of Aiken, can never be replicated and serve as a recognized reason that Aiken has become a destination for equestrian activities as well as superior residential living. I would hope that the commission would take all this into consideration, deny this request, and perhaps give Mr. Wetzel's suggestion that this should be part of a larger discussion and perhaps table this application for a later date. And I appreciate Mr. Ogletree's comments. Do you have any questions?
Any question from the board to Mr. Giobbe?
Mr. Giobbe, what is, if this variance were granted, what's the worst-case scenario in your opinion?
As a practical matter, the immediate effects would probably be relatively minimal. But again, I put it in the context of the larger considerations of how we want to preserve the Horse District and what it was meant to be. And the fact that there is what may be a temporary and immediate concern by the applicant's part, we should not allow that to influence what could be a negative effect on our longer-term considerations, which, under the comprehensive plan, and which all of us who live in that area, and certainly I think most people throughout the town, want to make sure that these open spaces, which can never be created again, be kept as they are and not allow them to be diminished. But again, as a practical consideration, the immediate concern would probably be not felt. But that is not to suggest that that doesn't have a negative effect on the overall aspect of what we are trying to achieve in that Horse District, and not only in the Horse District, but for Aiken as a whole.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for the city as well. If this variance were granted, what does the Horse District have zoning that would protect is there anything that could go in there? What is the worst case scenario?
So both properties would remain zoned Horse District. There's no rezoning of property associated with this at this time. But the northern, well, both properties would still continue to exist under the Horse District rules, which again promotes primarily commercial equestrian uses unless otherwise grandfathered, due to the fact that, again, residences in the Horse District are considered essentially the accessory to the structure or to the property and would need to come before this board to grant a special exception to do so. So it's unique in that it does have larger lot sizes. It does not limit the number of horses on the property other than by being able to maintain the property in accordance with some standards that are established in the zone as far as removal of manure and things like that. But in that sense, it's still governed by that. There aren't additional commercial uses allowed, and residential uses are limited to the special exception provision.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Do we have others to speak to the variance request?
Hi, Jenny Stoker again. First, I'm going to say that Lucy Knowles and Jack Wetzel were sitting in the back, and they both had to leave because they had appointments they had to get to, and asked me to express that they are still, I think Jack wrote a letter that's in there, and he's opposed because of his concerns and his wish that the whole, as Ed said, the whole issue of lot size be looked at in the big picture instead of looking at this one property and dividing it. And the main concern that Lucy had, and Lucy was one of the ones who drafted helped draft the ordinances, and she's the head of the Equine Committee now. And her concern is that if it is divided, that the other large HD properties may then ask to be divided as well. If they're no longer viable as a big piece, that they would ask to be divided. And the impact of a lot of small barns is different than one large barn. So that was her concern. I think, as I look back through the agreement from 2012, the mediation agreement that Mr. Revere referenced, and that the City Council turned down, even though it was technically agreed upon, but then City Council had to vote on it, and they decided to vote against it, accepting it. I'm not sure if y'all went back to 2012 to read all of this, but it's very enlightening. And one of the things that sticks out to me is, Mr. Paternitti's comments in that, and the question about the 10-acre lot size came up, and it was asked why is it 10 acres when there's so many that are not 10 acres. And as he explained, and it makes sense to me, that was looked at as the optimum size. It would be great if there was nothing smaller than that. These already were smaller, and so as some people have done in the last few years, they've bought more than one parcel, and they operate them as one stable by combining, which is, I think, the ideal thing, instead of dividing, is to put these things back together into larger pieces. So it's, the 10-acre is not the size that all of them are, but that would be the optimum minimum if you were going to come in and start. And in every zone in the town, it's like that. Nothing, RS-15 doesn't have all 15,000 square feet or whatever whatever that means. A lot of them are a lot smaller than that. And if you look at this map, which I never really had looked at before, with all the different colors and things, there's some of the HD zone properties that are very small houses on a very small lot, but they've been zone HD for all these years since the zoning, and they're never going to have it's like Jeannie Grote's house, which is right on the corner. It's never going to have a horse in it, and there's a little property on, the little tiny pieces that are HD because they are. But it's not, and I question whether the taxes on a commercial piece, if it's zone HD, or do they pay different taxes? He mentioned something about he's being taxed as a commercial property.
And we didn't research how the county assesses that as part of this, so I haven't pulled how each of the properties had been assessed by the county.
Oh, so the county sets the tax, and then the...
Correct, yeah. So the county sets the assessment based upon the use of the property, and so they make that decision.
So it's the use and not the zoning then?
That in these cases, I'm not sure. I'm not positive. I couldn't answer that as well as somebody from the county could. I could research it further.
I would imagine it's probably, they're not, I think you would probably heard from them if they were being, but also I just want to point out there's a big variety of properties for sale over in that area now. There are some that are zoned RSS, and there's some that are Zone HD, and some of them have been for sale for years and years, but there's tiny ones, there's big ones, there's a lot of stuff for sale that's not selling, and I don't know that it's because, his is 10 acres that it's not selling. I think in these properties, they're unique, and it takes one person who comes in, and that's going to fit that person, and they're going to buy it. And some of them are for sale for years and years and years until that person comes along. So I think dividing it is, obviously, it's dividing it to sell or dividing it to use or whatever. It may or may not get used any differently, so why divide it? That's the question. I mean, if you have to answer your criteria, why would you say yes? Why is he asking for this? He wants 5 acres instead of 10. It's not a unique, I mean, it may be unique in that it's 10 acres, but it's not unique. I would say that the ones that are 0.37 acres in Zone HD and don't even have a horse on them, they could, that's pretty unique if you ask me. So I would think that this should be looked at in the whole big picture and not just this one. Maybe it comes back as you're looking at the whole, as it wouldn't be you, I assume it would be Planning Commission looking at lot sizes or, restrictions on all of these horse zones. But I don't think it would be a good idea to just divide this one at this time. Thank you.
Any question from the board to Ms. Stowe? Thank you. Others to speak to the variance request? Final call. Others to speak to the variance request?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Mr. Reverie.
I'm going to call him back for rebuttal time.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll wait for that.
Rebuttal time is 3 minutes.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned your taxes, commercial taxes.
And insurance, for that matter, yes.
Have you gone to the county and city and appealed these tax rates?
I have tried, but because it's one parcel, one side's being used residentially, but because it's one parcel, it all remains the same with the commercial, even after the fire.
Okay, it just seems like you could take your lawyer and go appeal
Some of
your
those
tax
things are
rate.
all in there.
What's that?
All of those thoughts are being gone through now to try and go back and reduce some of this.
Okay, thank you.
And I'd like to point out, too, that Mrs. Stoker was absolutely right. There are a lot of parcels out there that are for sale. This is not to say, oh, I can sell it like this if it's divided. I'm looking forward, trying to create for the future of what's going to be a horse district that's going to have viable horse properties. Doesn't change the look of it. No, everybody thinks it's 2 parcels now. Most people don't know that that's one big lot. And again, I've had all of from Gina Salatino with 30-some horses in her barn riding by every day, through the Wildesons, all of the people who actually ride in there, except for one, are all there saying, yes, this would be a good thing, and they've all written letters to that extent. So.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Thank you.
I'll just be brief. I just don't think this sets any precedence when you're the only one in the horse district that's privately owned that's 10 acres. And you cannot have a 6-acre lot and a 4-acre lot, essentially. And you've got small lots. Either they argue they're going to be combined and become horse district, or they probably should be residential. With all those small lots, and it's not hurt the horse district to have those small lots. I don't hear anybody complaining about all these other small lots that don't meet the 10-acre standard. But my client is stuck with one 10-acre lot being the only one, and I think that does create a hardship. Thank you.
Thank you. I've already issued the last call for those who wish to speak. to the variance request. The chair will now entertain a motion so we can enter a period of discussion.
Mr. Chair,
But
really to warrant some discussion and get this issue out once and for all, I'm going to move, Mr. Chair, that the application number 19-93-001, requesting a variance to section 4.3.1 of the zoning ordinance to allow the subject property to be divided into 2 lots of less than 10 acres within the horse district be denied. Those two parcels, I'm sorry, were a 6.35 acre lot and a 3.65 acre lot be denied. And and this be recorded in the, if voted on, be recorded in the Aiken County RMC office.
do we have a second?
I second the motion.
Judy, you second it. It's been properly moved and second to deny the variance request. Do we have any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
John?
with the profitability clause aside, I have a hard time not respecting his desire to subdivide his own property. I don't see where, with all the smaller properties around him, and if he wants to subdivide his own property, why shouldn't he be able to? That's with the profitability clause put aside. I think with the zoning ordinance that's in place and the protections that exist there, I don't think if he does subdivide and sell, I don't think it would be of great harm to the neighborhood. And I'm conflicted still, but that's kind of how I'm leaning.
I'm too conflicted with this because I've been familiar with this property in this area all my life. But again, this board by law is governed by these 6 criteria. These 6 criteria must be met, all 6. I don't think the criteria where the, number 1, where the extraordinary or exceptional conditions pertain to this piece of property, I don't see that. But I also don't see on item 3, due to the conditions, the application of the ordinance to this particular piece of property would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property. I guess I could go through each one, but I can see 2 that, in my opinion, are not satisfied, where all 6 must be satisfied, if I'm correct, Mr. Chair.
I basically feel that the board is torn but sympathetic. And it's my feeling that I recognize when something is beyond my pay grade, and that the ordinance itself, when it reads 10 acres, maybe it should be revisited. But it would probably be a higher power than us that ought to, we can make a recommendation, but they are the ones that would have to sanction and revisit to the ordinance itself to determine whether or not 1 through 10 is enough for the HD district. But I don't feel that we ought to go and do my higher grade pay. I feel that we probably should deny this request and then instruct the planning department to elevate this, to have a review of the particular ordinance, elevate it to city council so that they can appoint. I was really sorry to see Lucy Knowles leave, because as chair of the Equine Committee, I wanted to hear what she had to say. And then there are other persons, the Planning Commission, the Design Review Board. They all have something to say, and I think that a committee to include the BZA ought to have something to say about what the change ought to be. So it's my feeling that for this action that we should deny, but also recommend.
But we have to follow the criteria that we're given right now.
Yes, yes, we have to.
But given the action that we will take on this, once that is done, then we can direct the planning director to forward a recommendation to
Yes, right.
the appropriate authority, i.e. city council, to review this
Correct.
Issue.
Correct.
It's reasonable.
Yep. The floor is still open for further discussion.
Call for the vote.
I think we're doing.
I just said
Don't
call
call
for the
for
vote.
Oh, The vote has been called. Those in favor of said motion show by raise of the right hand. Those opposed, same sign. The motion is carried 5-1. That concludes the items on the agenda. The chair would entertain a motion.
I so move.
Get a second?
Second.
Non-voting motion, we stand adjourned.